Hey everybody, I'm Dan Lapel from New Focus Recordings, and really happy to be joined by Ning and David Bird to talk about really special upcoming recording release, Iron Orchid. Hey guys,
Hello, Dan.
so this is such a fantastic record. It comes out on September 3rd, and it's piano with electronics and really amazing range of sounds. But there's also a very cool backstory, the genesis of the piece. It grew out of a multimedia sort of interactive sculpture piece in a way, right? You want to tell everybody out there in YouTube land a little bit more about Echo Chamber, the sort of the parent piece, I guess, in a way.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Dan, for having us again on New Focus. It's a pleasure, and
Pleasure,
we're
pleasure's
really,
pleasure's all mine.
yeah. And so to start with Iron Orchid, so to go back a couple years, in 2019, David Bird, myself, and this Brooklyn-based, he's what we call the site-specific public artist. His name is Mark Riegelman. Got together to work on this project called Echo Chamber. So Mark Riegelman's kind of a rock star in the public art community, I guess you can say that. And he is a really good friend of mine and someone that I have admired, uh, for many years for his work. And so we wanted to explore sound through a sculpture that is also in nature and in the general public where people can hear, touch, listen, and interact. And I have worked with David, I guess in 2015 on a separate project. And I just always thought David's intuition with sounds from the nature, from our environment, together with his sensitivity towards electronic music was always really impressive to me. So I just thought, well, if three of us got together for Echo Chamber, it would be pretty great. And so here we start. So the Echo Chamber sculpture itself, I hope we can pull up image of it later, is consisted of 56 tubes, metal tubes cut in different sizes. So the shortest 3 feet, the longest 11 feet. So the sculpture in the end got to be pretty big. And within each of the tubes, there was a tiny little speaker. I'll let David talk more about that. So then on one side of the sculpture is plexiglass of various colors, really bright colors. People can see the reflection of themselves. Then on the other side, they look into the tube and it's dark and it's hollow and has strange sound coming out of it. And so that is this sculpture basically in a nutshell. And then there is the piano side. There's me, and my piano sound is again, David can talk more about that, filtered through the speakers. My playing is active, but the sculpture itself is sort of amplification that's removed from the body of the piano. And just want to say that this work was first, the Echo Chamber I'm talking about, was first premiered on April 15th, 2019 at George Washington University. And we did the performance in the Great Hall of Marvin Center. And the sculpture itself was basically on view for the public, for the students and faculties and the community for about a month afterwards.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I'll jump in about the sound stuff, but before that, there was an interesting element to the positioning of the piano as well in Ning's performance, because the piano itself kind of mirrored the sculpture. They both kind of faced each other in a really interesting way. And so it's a beautiful kind of like juxtaposition of performer against this massive like metal sculpture. So it's a really beautiful performance to be present for. In terms of the sound stuff that was happening, I mean, a lot of what was happening, it was a mixture of both trying to understand like what the resonance of those tubes was going to end up being and how different sounds would react to those tubes. But then also developing sounds with Ning that could work in that space and also kind of move through the tubes in different ways. So it was it was an interesting way of thinking about not only material in terms of generating sounds with Ning, who's an amazing collaborator, an amazing like sound sculptor, but also thinking about, okay, well, we're making this sound that's going to exist in this really unique and strange space that we kind of had to imagine before we could even implement it. Because it wasn't ever, we weren't ever able to like fully test it until very close to the premiere time.
Sure.
So, I think maybe, I don't know if this is already jumping ahead a little bit, but, in generating all this material for the sculpture and generating all of these ideas that had these like different perspectives because the nature of the sculpture and how you can kind of see it from all these different angles, we came away from the sculpture experience with all this wonderful material. And that kind of, that kind of made us interested in doing this album that was kind of like I don't know, almost like a fictional version of this sculpture in like a purely, pre-recorded album format.
Sure. Well, we can watch a little bit of footage from the actual interactive performance, right? So let's do that, and that will put everything in context a little bit, and then maybe I'd love to talk to you guys a little bit more about that transitional process of taking this piece that had been envisioned as this multimedia thing and zooming in on the audio, and then maybe we'll listen a bit more to some of the tracks off the record. So this is an excerpt from an actual performance of the multimedia interactive sculpture piece Echo Chamber, and check it out. Wow, yeah, that was really, really cool. So how much longer after the premiere of the multimedia piece did you guys then go into the studio? And you recorded this with Ryan Strieber at Octavian Audio, who is responsible for so many great recordings on our label and many others. So what was the time lapse between, and what was the process like of trying to sort of zoom in and focus only on the audio component?
Well, I think for a while after that performance, I think we wanted to do the piece again, just because every performance, every environment seemed to invite all these different ways of exploring the piece. But it was a very difficult thing to reproduce again. I mean, to get the sculpture up, to find the location. It was certainly like the first time that I had glimpsed kind of Mark Riegelman's world of finding permits for spaces and dealing with structural engineering and the complex nature of that. It's definitely on a different time scale than most like classical music or new music, like funding structures and performances and premieres and stuff. So I think, I don't know when it was. I mean, I felt like we were looking for another performance of that. And I think at one point, Ning and I were just like, let's just make an album. Let's just like do it, like take this stuff and find a way to get it out there. And I remember feeling really liberated when we made that decision because it felt like, I don't know, it just really opened up all these doors and actually like kind of like inverted the possibilities with the initial performance and sculpture that we could then like, really take a step back and then reshape the piece, and it turned into a different piece entirely through that process of kind of, looking into that material and figuring out what it would be in an album based format as opposed to a sculpture. And I think that process of translating a sculpture into an album is like a really interesting and challenging one that I don't know. I'm going to be reflecting on this whole process for a while afterwards because it was really unique.
So just to add to what David just said, we visited Ryan Strieber at Octaven several times with, whether it's sort of the tail end of the echo chamber with materials for that, or, with Iron Orchid to record materials just for the electronic part of the recording, or just me. So I think in the end, I came away feeling like, wow, I've recorded so much for this piece, but I'm not exactly sure how that all connected together, because it was like over 2 years of period. And then the final recording happened about a year ago, no, half a year ago. And that's when the piece really came as together as one large piece for me.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel like people could hear this record, not necessarily know about Echo Chamber and hear it as its own thing, but with all the backstory, it becomes so much richer and very interesting to think about that transitional process. Maybe let's listen to a bit of the opening movement, Garden, and then talk a little bit about what we're hearing musically. So this is the first movement of the audio piece, Iron Orchid, and it's called Garden. Cool. So that was an excerpt from the opening movement, Garden. There's a lot going on musically. There's some microtonal beatings between pitches in the piano and the electronics. There's this sort of growing ambient environmental electronics part, some extended piano techniques. Walk us through what's going on there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the generation of this movement is a great example of this workflow with Ning of generating sounds that could either work in interesting resonant spaces or be layered in a really interesting way. And I think with regard to some of the topics that you mentioned about microtonality and layering and stuff, and inside of the piano stuff, a lot of these sounds were, we would kind of sit down in the Yarn Wire studio, find some cool things, and then I would go back and try to layer them and think about big composite gestures that would work well. And there are a lot of like very subtle microtonal shifts that were just pitch shifted piano sequentially, typically, just like, I don't know, just a little bit down, just to give it a little bit more of a gestural feeling rather than fixed in a temperament kind of feeling. And there are a lot of, that was all stuff also that we explored in the actual structure, the sculpture too, because it did have a unique tuning system that wasn't related to equal temperament. So I don't know, this one, it felt like a little bit more fluid in terms of how I was dealing with those microtonal settings, but there were still like elements of that initial strange kind of harmony of the sculpture present in the piece. And Ning, do you want to jump in?
Oh, sorry. I was just curious. I'm curious to ask about what the tuning was in the sculpture version.
It was weirdly close to F sharp minor.
Yeah.
With like, some other stuff there. I don't know, some added notes.
Cool.
But also, I mean, the notes were messed up, but it was like a rough F minor.
Right.
Very rough. Mm-hmm.
Nice. So, but in order to sort of replicate that color, basically, in the studio, without having to retune Ryan's piano and drive a lot of people crazy, you guys cleverly decided to pitch shift, which I think is a cool solution. Go ahead, Ning.
Yeah.
I was going to say that we did a lot of, David and I did a lot of experimentation with playing different things of the similar nature, or playing the same thing, but just in so many different ways. Like the opening of Garden, for example, the tremolos, play it at, really sort of in this low and slow tremolo, really soft, but then the same thing really loud or really fast, or adding crescendo to it. It's like, then the next time we get together, same thing, we would, use some kind of concept or idea or one technique, whether that is inside the piano or, on the keys, just trying, I feel like, just as many ways as we could to find something that felt really like, fitting and interesting.
Yeah, so you guys use the studio to sculpt a bit as well. Yeah. Should we, I think it might be cool to hear some, because the inside the piano thing really starts to become a big part of the piece. In Iron, there's this whole vocabulary of scrapes that we hear. It's not just scrape, it's like a scrape orchestra. and then in Petals later, you're using a slide inside the piano. Maybe why don't we listen to a little bit of Petals, where that motive becomes a sort of almost like a sort of primary driver for the texture, and then talk about that a little bit. Beautiful, haunting moment. That's a slide inside the piano strings in the last movement of the piece, Petals. Ning, what was the sort of all these different techniques inside the piano? What was that whole experience like in terms of this? It seems like it would be a lot of excavation of timbres and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have to say thank you, Ryan, for letting us do that
Yeah.
with your beautiful piano. There was that's those sounds we had this using. We tried many different things to see what is like the most, I guess, like out of this world kind of sound of slides, whether that's a I think bike tire, right? And then also different shapes and materials of guitar slides. Sure, Dan, you know all of those really
Yeah.
well. And then just trying to use, you know, different mallets and super ball, different size of super ball, you know, just trying a whole different things. I actually, you know, don't know exactly which of the ones we recorded ended up in the electronic part. David, it's a bike tire, right?
I mean, all of those ended up in there. I think the bike tire was in iron, and then the the slide was the one in petals.
Okay.
It is hard to know though, because again, all these things are like just joined together. And maybe to add to that, I think in when we're finding these sounds, and Ning was so good at like catching on to this, even though it was just really hard to know this in advance. But it really feels like when we were making the material for the sculpture that we were like feeding the sculpture. It was like an offering to it. And so we were looking for sounds that would resonate well within it, that it would like to have in its digestive system or something. We're looking, I think, feel like we would just like when we found something that had a really uncanny metallic sound, we'd kind of look at each other and be like, that's the one, that's really good. Because we knew it would work well in the sculpture. And I think whether we were using those sounds for the sculpture or for Iron Orchid, this kind of need to feed this metallic thing was like part of this whole process.
Very cool. Well, so the last excerpt that I thought we might check out is way more pianistic. It's from the movement. Is it A Thin War of Metals? Is that or Thin War of Metal? And I think actually for me this was really something I found very compelling about the piece. You know, I think often you think about an installation type piece or a multimedia piece as veering more towards the static and the ambient type sounds. And this piece has those things, but also it's always growing. And the fact that there's this sort of middle little suite of movements that have Ning much more at the keyboard just gives it a much more sort of diversified pianistic voice that I think, or also a protagonist voice that makes the whole piece very powerful and gives it this great arc. So let's check out this moment. It's probably the fiercest moment in the piece where you really get to shred a bit at the keyboard. It's from A Thin War of Metals. Great. Yeah, that's a very very vibrant, dynamic passage. So was that part in the echo chamber version? It seems like that's not quite the kind of music that I would expect to hear in a multimedia interactive sculpture piece.
That movement actually is not, at least not
Okay.
my my solo piano part. You know how, you know, David was just talking about this need and to feed to the sculpture.
I feel like this is me standing up to the sculpture. We're having a, you know, we're having a real conversation now, and that's sort of how I feel about this movement. This really need to almost like combat, a bit, and it's like restless and difficult. It's a struggle, and truthfully, that piano part is is a bit of a struggle, and we did end up deciding to um, to make it even faster than what David had originally intended, and I think there's a a sense of even more like urgency to the music, to the playing, than what was designed originally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I feel like there's this pretty strong tradition in electroacoustic music of the push and pull between the human and the technological, and the idea that the human sort of, at some point in a lot of landmark electroacoustic pieces, asserts themselves, like in a way that isn't so subservient to the technology. So it's cool that, yeah, I felt that in that movement for sure. There's a bravura there that doesn't exist in textures where you're really integrated, so much so at times where you can't actually tell what is piano and what is electronic, but here it's obviously like extremely clear, so that I think it sort of electrifies the album when that kind of material comes out. It's very cool. Do you want to add anything to that, David? We're talking a lot about your music without letting you speak.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I actually, the kind of pieces that you're talking about, that kind of standing up to the technology and electronics, I think is something that I like that approach to electronic music. I find that most of the tools like aspire to some kind of synthesis between these things that often actually end up placing less agency on the performers, which I think ends up making the performance just not as fun, maybe, or less performed. And I like what we can do with these formats with regard to just, it's like it becomes a kind of theater to explore our relationship with technology in our lives. So that's how I kind of think of it. And to kind of place someone like Ning in this environment with this big metallic electronic sculpture, it becomes a kind of play of, however you interpret it, but it feels more of a potent kind of metaphor than a kind of just an abstract synthesis of tools, of fancy tools and stuff. And in terms of the material that Ning is playing there, it sounds really cheesy to say this, but because so much of the theme of the piece was different perspectives, it's just like a very classic serial 12-tone kind of thing that gets transformed in different ways. And it's almost like, Ning is expressing the multitude that the sculpture is capable of doing, not only through this crazy virtuosic performance, but just through the nature of the materials being all different perspectives on her instrument.
Very cool. I feel like that we just landed on a couple cool nuggets that sort of summarize the breadth of this piece in general. The fact that you experimented with a handful of different ways of manifesting agency with the live performer, and how she was relating to the electronics, but also the material itself. It really, I always find it extremely refreshing to hear experimental music that is not fixated on any one kind of material, that but still feels very cohesive. And I think that's very true about this piece, despite the fact that it's also a very focused piece and it's coming from a very specific, literally site-specific experience. So bravi to both of you guys. It's just such a pleasure getting to know this piece. And we do want to mention all the people behind the scenes for this one: Brian Strieber, Charles Mueller, engineering, and Chris Botta mastered it. Mark Riegelman, who was the sculptor, also did the design work. And Neil Beckmann and myself worked behind the scenes on the label, and it's been a great pleasure. And we're really excited to see it come out on September 3rd. Like to encourage everybody to check out the piece and all the places that you buy and don't buy music in our world, but you can listen to the music, which is the most important thing. So thank you so much, guys, and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan.
Much, Dan.
See everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.